Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Using Student Voice to Amplify Learning. Thank you for joining us. I think we're going to have, kind of a small group. It's spring break for some, so I am recording this webinar, so if you know of people who wanted to hear what was being shared but weren't able to be here today, just let them know that we are recording, and I will post this on our YouTube channel that you can link to from our professional development page, which I'll share the link to the eLearning Lab page in just a little bit, but you'll be able to find that there hopefully by early next week. So my name is Mary Carnahan, and I am the eLearning Resource Specialist with the Department of Education, and part of my job is to produce these webinars. So I'm really excited to have partnered with our literacy specialist today to bring this topic to you all. So I first want to start with just a few housekeeping items. All lines were muted when you all joined the meeting, so please keep your line muted so that we don't have background noise during the webinar. The chat box is open. You should see that on the left side of your screen, or sorry, on the right side of your screen. Please use that throughout the call to ask questions of our presenters and also to have a conversation with the other participants. Share ideas that you have, things that you might be doing in your classroom, or how you might do some of the things that the presenters talked to you about today. It's definitely, we don't want the chat to just be questions for the presenters, but definitely use each other as resources too. As you're making comments, please make sure that you choose everyone from that Send To dropdown. It defaults to only send messages to me, and we want to make sure that everybody can see your questions and comments as we go through the hour. So this webinar is part of our eLearning Lab series. That is an ongoing series that we have webinars once or twice a month on different educational technology-related topics. So like I said, we have those ongoing. We'll be scheduling more, I think about 3 more for the rest of the school year. So be watching for new topics being announced soon. And there is the link on that page. You can't click on it to get to it, but you can copy that down to get to the eLearning Lab website, where we also have a link to our YouTube channel where you can see all of the previous webinars that we've produced and recorded. Another piece of our professional development that we encourage people to participate in is Twitter. If you are on Twitter, using that as part of your professional learning network, we encourage you to use the eLearn hashtag to connect with other educators, a lot of educators in the state, but also many outside of Indiana and even outside of the country. As part of that eLearn hashtag, there are weekly Twitter chats on Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, and this week's chat, we're excited to have Control-Alt-Delete, the Control-Alt-Delete team sharing tech tools and resources to avoid teacher and student burnout. So if you are interested in Twitter chats, if you're new to Twitter chats, this is a great one to participate in. It's very low-key, low-stress, fairly slow-moving. So it's an easy one. It's a nice one to dip your toe in to get started in Twitter chats. One thing I neglected to mention, I talked about recording the webinar, but also we do award PGPs for webinars. So tomorrow I will send out PGP certificates to everyone who registered, who signed into the webinar today. So you should receive those tomorrow from me. And with that, I believe that is all of my announcements. So I'm going to pass the mic on to Jordan Pridemore. I'm excited to be partnered with her today. She is our secondary literacy specialist at the Department of Education, and she's going to introduce today's topic and our presenters.
Hello. I'm very excited to introduce today's presenters. They're just a great team of people from Anderson Community Schools, and they're going to be talking about how we can create opportunities for students to use their voice in our classrooms and how doing that can boost learning and retention. So first up, we'll have Dana Gardner, who's going to talk about why utilizing student voice is so important in modern classrooms. Then John Sedgwick will present his and Andrea Meadows' ideas about how to do this in elementary classrooms. And finally, Sean Churchill is going to talk about implementing these ideas at the secondary level. So stay tuned. There's lots of great information ahead. So Dana, you're up.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in today to this. And if we want to go ahead and go on to slide number 4. So I'm Dana Gardner. I have been in education for 23 years, 20 of the years as a math teacher at the secondary and the junior high level. My last 2 years were a one-to-one blended learning situation where we did have a boxed program, but I learned very quickly that a boxed program has to have a lot of other things implemented into it, along with large group and small group instruction and all types of things, but it was very successful and I enjoyed it a lot. The last 3 years I've been an instructional coach, testing coordinator, and whatever else they need done in the building at Anderson High School. Okay, we want to go on to slide deck 5. I'm leading off today to talk about why students need to have a voice in the classroom and share some strategies to quickly and easily give students a voice in the classroom. Okay, we want to go on to slide 5. So I attended a conference this October, a Gym Night Coaching Conference, and this study was shared with me, and I found it to be really moving. It's a study that was done across Europe in many, many schools, and it had to do with giving students a voice, and this was actually just with giving them a voice in the last 1 to 5 minutes of class, having the students reflect and talk about what they've learned today. And you'll see from the numbers here, it was really, I mean, when you can have 14 times more likely to be a better learner, that's some awesome stuff there. So this study was shared, and this is just a few of the highlights that was shared with giving the students a voice just in closing the lesson. And today I'm going to talk about giving them the voice during the opening and closing, but then I think we need to give the students a voice throughout the lesson as well. Okay, we go on to slide deck 6. So here is a research that was done by Denise White and Alyssa Brady, and most of my strategies have came from a book they wrote, and at the end of my part of the presentation, I'll share the book with you. I highly recommend this book to anyone and everyone that is a teacher. If I go back in the classroom, it will be like my teaching Bible. So what these two ladies did is they took a group of 3 very good, and they were elementary teachers, intermediate grade level. I think it was 3rd or 4th. I can't remember for sure which grade level. And they had these 3 ladies that they said were all awesome teachers prepare a great lesson, a 3-week unit actually on transportation. Then they had them also prepare openers and closers. So great teacher number 1 just did the great lessons with no opener or closers. And then at the end of the 3-week unit, they gave a test without any review. 68% was great lessons. Then they had the second great teacher do openers and the great lesson, but no closers. 78% without review. So very close to mastery there. And then they had the third teacher, great teacher, do an opener, a great lesson, and a closer. And when I'm talking about opener, great lesson, and closer, we're talking about all of them with student voice, all right? 88%, so well above mastery. But then what was really the kicker for me was 3 weeks later, they gave the same test without any review, and 48% for the great lesson. So the kids had already lost 20% in the short time. So we know that did not get stored in their memory well. Then with the opener and the great lesson, they just lost 10%. So 68%, you know, still isn't bad for 3 weeks later, but we'd like to have more than that. But what just really threw me back when I was attending this was 88% when they did the opener and closer with the great lesson, So they said pretty much so problem for problem, the students missed exactly the same problems as they had before. So this to me was just mind-blowing, that what the kids knew they knew and what they didn't know they didn't know. All right? Okay, we can go on to slide deck 7. So that was done at the elementary level. So I was mind-blown, but not totally convinced yet because that was elementary and I'm secondary. So we did a little informal study at Anderson High School, all right, and so we did our study with, I had 2 senior ECA classes, and if you know anything about high school testing, if you have gotten to your senior year and you have taken your math test for your graduation qualification exam over and over and over and failed and failed and failed, you are not going to be happy to be in this class. So this was not a group of seniors that felt like they were good at math. It's not a group of seniors that felt like they could be successful. So, and typically at Anderson High School, our pass rate on our seniors is just 2 to 10% of them pass during their senior year. You know, the majority of the students have passed before they have gotten to that point, for the ECA anyways. So day 2, I started working with this teacher on day 1. The other teacher, they had the same plans, but I let her do her own thing with the curriculum, and I did not do the open and closers and the student voice with her. So with the one teacher, I went in and I spent the first week kind of teaching the teacher and the students about student voice. So on day 2, I surveyed the students and asked them how many of them were going to pass the ECA, and it was a big 0, none of them. All right. I told them how awkward the openers and closers were going to be. We're not used to using our voice in a math class. We're used to the teacher doing most of the talking and just calling on us occasionally. Then I came back at day 10, and when I asked the students then, after having just 2 weeks of voice, most of them felt like they would pass. When I came back on day 20 to see how things were going, 75% of the students told me this is their favorite class. And you know what? From there, I didn't even need to know anymore. It didn't even matter to me at that point in time who passed, because I had a class where 75% of the seniors that hated math and had failed over and over now would tell me math is their favorite class. It was hard to hold the tears back then. So at the end, we had a 50% pass rate, which granted is at 100% and is at 75%, which I wish we would have had. But it's a great improvement from 2 or 10%. And almost all the students, with the exception of one, were within 20 points of passing. So we had students grow 100, 150, even 200 points from the last several times they had tested. So what I found out from this study, our informal study, is student voice really does matter. Okay, we can go on to the next slide deck. Okay, so what is an opener? An opener is something that gives students a voice. It's a way to hook them and get them engaged in the student learning even when they don't want to be hooked and they don't want to be engaged, all right? It provides a connection between what we already know and what we're going to learn in the brain. And that connection will automatically be made if you make the students use their voice. Even though they don't want to learn and they don't want to connect it, it will still just happen. So it's communication amongst the students. What it is not bell work. It is not giving the students 2 math problems to do to review what they've covered before. It's not having them write the answer to an essay question while you get attendance taken. Now, not to say that you can't take attendance while the opening is going on, but it's where the students are actively engaged. Okay, we can go on to slide deck 9. So here are the opening strategies, and like I said, my last slide actually gives you will give you the book and all the information you need for the book. But here are the 8 opening strategies that they share in the book. And I'm going to go over just a few of them. I don't have enough time to go over all of them today. But I do feel like all of them can be done with technology and without technology. And I feel like in the one-to-one classroom, we need to mix things up. We can't have 100% of everything be using the technology, but we do want to, use it as much as we can. So the first one I would talk about is comics and cartoons. And so on these, you can easily go into Google, and you can just Google comic plus electrons or cartoons plus Civil War. And many will come up. So then all you do is decide on the 2, 3, 4 you want to use, and then you can either put them in digitally in your learning management system, in a shared Google Doc, in, you know, a brainstorming website, wherever today's meet, wherever you want to put them in, or run copies of them and pass them out to the students. You don't really need one per student because the students can work in groups, and you divide them up and they look at the comics, they discuss with each other why it's funny. You can call on one student for each comic to kind of explain why it's funny, and then you put the three together, or the 3 or 4 or 2, how many ever comics or cartoons you had, and have the students prepare a statement of insight on what they think we're going to be learning today. And then that statement of insight can actually be shared like on todaysmeet.com, or if your learning management system has a discussion board, on that discussion board, or something like that. Now, with all of these, we do need to have student accountability, so you do always want to have some discussion with the class also, and call on a couple students to share to make sure they always know that, you know, they could be called on, so they want to participate in the discussion. The next one I want to talk about is the human continuum. This is probably my favorite one, and there's no prep for the teacher involved in this. To do it without the technology, you have students sign up from, you make an invisible number line across your room. You say, down here is where the kids that know the most about what we're learning today. So here down on the other end is where the kids know the least. And you give them, however, you know, in the beginning it might be 90 seconds after they get used to doing it, maybe a minute or 30 seconds to get themselves lined up. And you might have to flatten the line in a couple places. But we can't get hung up on all making sure they're exactly where they need to be and everything. Groups are always exactly the same number. Sometimes we tend to get hung up on those things, and we just need to keep moving on. But we have them line up, and then here's the real kicker. Then what you do is you fold the line. So you take the end of the line and bring it up, and you pair that person up. So the person who says they know the least is paired with the person that says they know the most, and they have to justify where they are at. So even though the student at the end of the line doesn't want to learn about that, obviously they do not want to learn about systems of equations that day, they still have to justify. So it is making them take ownership of that, and when they do, it provokes some emotions, and it opens up extra brain task space there. Now, this also could be done electronically, because you can make a table or a number line, and you could share that out and maybe have 5 or 10 different spots on the number line, you know, one being, I know this as well as the teacher and I could teach this, and, you know, the other end of the number line being, I don't even know what these words mean. You can make it funny, you know, fun for the kids, and they can put their name in where they need to go, and then you could call on kids and make them justify. So it could be done electronically also. So Watch the Connection is a great one, too. I love the compelling questions and quotes. So you can click on the links in here, and it'll take you out to a possible site that could be used in a one-to-one classroom. But also, towards the end here, I have a link that also you can go to, and there is a short description of each one of these too, since I don't have time to go over every one of them today. Okay, we can go on to the next slide deck. Okay, so closing a lesson. So closing a lesson obviously is as important, if not more important, than even opening the lesson, because the study in Europe was basically about closing a lesson and making students reflective. And then we also saw in the study that the 2 ladies had done that closing the lesson is really, I think, where you do get the retention. So closing a lesson is very important. The students have to be actively engaged, and they have to reflect on what they've learned somehow. And this reflection is actually what lets their brain store the information and link it and store it in multiple places. So I believe that is what really causes the retention, because when the kids go to do the test or use the information later, they have more than one place to recall it from because it's really gotten stuck in there well. It should be collaborative, and it should help the teacher on feedback for future planning as well, even though that's not the main reason for closing the lesson. What it is not is asking if there's any questions or the teacher summarizing the lesson. And unfortunately, when I was in the classroom, I was really good at that. I'm saying, okay, today this is what we covered, and we learned blah, 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 blah. And the only person that was reflecting there was me. So that is definitely something I would change. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so the two closing, so here are the closing strategies again, and you can click on the links and take you out to websites that we could use to use these closing strategies. They can all be done verbally or paper or pencil as well. And also there is on the Google Doc that will be shared here shortly. If you want to go out there, there is a brief description of each one of these as well. So the two I'm going to go over are the one-word summaries. I really love the one-word summaries. Now the key about the one-word summary is you take words out. So there's little to no prep for the one-word summary. So if I was going to do a one-word summary to wrap up what I was doing today, I would take out the word closing, I would take out the word opener, and I would probably take out voice. And then I would say, okay, you come up with one word that represents what you learned today. So it makes the students think a little deeper and really reflect on what have they learned today. And then you could easily have them put it in Wordle or in today's Meet, somewhere like that. And you could then, you know, call, who put this word in? Why did you put that there? Who put this in? Who's someone that said this, you know? So there's still some accountability there. Then the other one I'm going to talk about is 55, which is really similar to the thumbs up, thumbs down. But you give them a little bit more clarification on that. So 5 is, I know it so well I could teach it tomorrow, and 1 is, I'm still really lost. But the difference is they have to share with someone and justify where they're at. And I think an important thing to tell the students then is it's okay to change your mind. If you picked 3, but after you talk to somebody you realize you're a 2 or you're a 4, that's okay to change. So then, you know, after they've had time to reflect with a partner or group, then you call on them. And the reflection could also be done in a discussion board or anything like, you know, one-to-one could be done in a discussion board or many different websites. So those are just a few. And like I said, you can get the information on these strategies by going to the actual document I've included, but I would strongly encourage you to buy the book. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So here is the Google Doc that will take you to the 8 opening and 8 closing strategies. And then also what I've listed on there are 33 different websites or tools that you could use in your one-to-one classrooms with your opening and closing strategies. I'm all for the technology, but I also want to add that I think we need to mix it up, and everything shouldn't be about the technology, and everything doesn't need to be on the technology. With student voice, it's okay to use the technology, but we also need to make sure the kids are actually using their voice. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So the important thing to remember is that if you use a strategy and you use the discussion or the learning voice, then what we get is retention, which is what we're all about. Okay, so it's kind of like that Chinese proverb, tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, but involve me and I learn. So when the kids start actually discussing and they're involved, then that's when the learning actually takes place. And sometimes it's a messy classroom. It isn't always, you know, as quiet and as organized as we'd like to be. And yeah, there's going to be some chatter that's not about what we really wanted it to be about that day. But here's the thing, that same kid that, you know, has finished their discussion on what you asked them to talk about and is talking about what they did last night, they probably, you know, that may have been the kid that sat there and looked 100% compliant, but actually was in another world the whole time you're teaching the lesson. So in the quiet, organized classroom that looks perfect, you might think they're learning and they may not really be learning anything. So sometimes we have to give a little to get a lot. Okay, next slide. So here is the book. It's called Ready to Go Instructional Strategies that Build a Collaboration, Communication, and Critical Thinking. In my mind, it's all about student voice because throughout the book, the students are working together, and to work together, you have to be talking. So you can get it at Amazon, paperback $28. You can also get it on Kindle. I currently have 4 of them right now because I like to keep one everywhere I can. It also, I will say, there's opening is 1 chapter and closing is chapter 6, and then there are 4 chapters in the middle, all about student voice and collaboration as well. There's activity in your room, getting the kids moving around the room. There's questionings and 8 strategies on how to do questioning better. There's 8 strategies on collaboration. So it's an awesome book, and I would highly recommend it. Okay, I think that wraps it up for me.
Okay, I guess I'm next. Hi, everyone. I'm John Sedgwick. I am the Technology Integration Specialist at Anderson, and I'm really just the mouthpiece here because Andrea Meadows is our elementary tech coach, and she does all the fantastic work. She meets with the elementary teachers. We have 6 elementaries. She's out there all the time working with them and shaping their lessons and helping them integrate technology, but also focusing on the learning goals. What I want to share with you today are some of the practical projects that we have going on in our elementary schools that will kind of incorporate student voice. It's really, in the elementary setting, it's a little bit different than the secondary setting because they're still learning about what their voice is and how to share that. So, so here are some of the things that Andrea has been doing with our elementaries. The first thing is, this is a little bit of an introduction to social media, but before just introducing students directly with social media, we want to give them some scaffolding. So this next slide is kind of shares what we're doing with that. Yep, go ahead on there, Mary. There we go. Before giving students the global audience, we'd like to start with a smaller audience so we could properly learn what to share and how to share it. So at the beginning of each year, this is one of Andrea's favorite activities. She starts with a practice Twitter account, and you've probably seen this done with paper sheets where students do practice tweets so that the teacher can take a look at them. But what she does as a class, she starts with discussing the anatomy of a tweet, and then they develop a classroom hashtag. The students develop their own handle. And every morning, Andrea would come in and put a tweet on the whiteboard that students could respond to, or they could create their own tweet as part of their morning work. So that's their morning thing. The first thing they come in, they can either respond to Andrea's tweet or create their own. This, you can tell right away, this has a lot of benefits. The teacher can learn more about the students' personal lives. There were constant opportunities to discuss digital citizenship concepts, and there's even some language arts can be fit in there along the way. By the second semester, once you've kind of shaped what is appropriate and inappropriate and how to word things, then Andrea would allow students to take over the class social media for a day. And the way she did that is she put the students in pairs and would share a Google Doc with those students, those 2 students and she, and then throughout the day when the students wanted to tweet, they would put that in the Google Doc, she would review it, and then put it on the classroom Twitter account. So that was how she kind of scaffolded her students into using social media accounts. Okay, next slide, please. And then the next part is, well, the best ways to give students into their lesson is to, excuse me, give them an authentic audience. And if you're familiar with the Triple E framework, that's the third of the third E is the extension of learning goals. So here is an example of how that can be used in the classroom. The next slide, please. So this first one, what I have here on the screen is just the resources that you would need for this. And when you have the, when you're in the Google, the slide deck here, you can click on those and it will take you to those. But this is an example of interactive displays. And those take a lot of different forms, and you've probably seen these. But our 5th grade students at Anderson Elementary are currently engaged in a project relating to the Underground Railroad. And they're learning about the symbolism of the freedom quilts, where there's, on the freedom quilts, people would make their own sections of the freedom quilt and then put them together. And they're learning about the symbolism there. So what they're going to do is they will create their own digital quilt square, a message using Google Drawings, and then they can put the visuals in there along with their message. and then the teacher prints those out, and they piece them together as you would in a quilt, put them on display in the classroom. So that's the first part of that activity. Then the students choose a topic related to the Underground Railroad, and they will provide a first-person account related to that using a webcam and green screen. So then once they work through the material and they present with their green screen and webcam, those videos are saved to the Google Drive, and then those links are turned into QR codes. And then those QR codes are attached to the students' quilt squares. And this gives a semi-permanent display in the classroom of what they've learned in about the Underground Railroad. And while it's not a totally global audience, it's a good way to scaffold students into presenting something for an audience. Granted, the audience in this case is limited to the people that travel through the classroom. So that's one example of some interactive displays that we're using at Anderson. Next slide, please. And another example is some digital museums, and you've probably seen there's a lot of ways to use these just like there were with the interactive displays. One example that we're using digital museums is taking place with our 5th grade students at 10th Street Elementary. And in the past, students, when they got to this point in their lessons about the states, they've learned the states and the capitals, but they've lacked an understanding of the diverseness of the geography and the cultures between these locations. So what they're doing this year is the 5th grade teachers are creating 3 breakout EDU games using regions of states with primary sources from the state's tourism departments for the students to engage in. There weren't, rather than have one breakout for each state, they grouped them into 3 areas and then have a breakout EDU game for each one. Then the students are going to document the trips that they go on in the form of a Google Tour Builder. And they're going to build a tour builder about their states and the information that they learn, and they're actually going to go to those tourism departments and those kind of things too to find those resources, and then they're going to make a Google tour. And then those tours are going to be compiled into one hyperdoc, and they're going to call that 10th Street Travel, and that's how they're going to promote those tours that they have completed. So that's an example of digital museums. And next slide, thank you. And again, digital journals are a great way for students to communicate what they've learned rather than the teacher just telling them what they should learn. The students can communicate what they have learned. And as with the other 2, these can take many forms. But Jerry Tarvin is a 5th grade teacher teaching high ability students, and they're getting ready to engage in a coding unit. And for this unit, they rotate through 4 activities over the course of the month. They'll also have guest speakers from STEM fields come in to speak to their class, and then they're also going to go on a field trip to the Purdue Polytechnic Institute there in Anderson. And if you haven't been to that building, it's fantastic. It's a Purdue extension, but it's a great building. It's brand new, and they have a lot of fantastic things going on there. We wanted a way to record their discoveries and their thinking as they completed the activities, a way to note questions for the speakers, reflect on their field trip, and so forth. So what they have done is they've selected Adobe Spark, and then as those things are coming along, as they get the speakers and go on the trips and so forth, they're going to document that in their journals. And they selected Adobe Spark because it's very easy to use, and now that they've kind of opened up Spark to the under 13 crowd, it makes it a little bit easier. And once those journals are completed, all the students will link their journals to one hyperdoc, and then that document can be shared with the community. So that's an example of digital journals. And then finally, this last activity is something that we have taken from something we tried with the teachers. Once they've learned their skills, we want them to be able to share those with the classroom or show how to use them. So if we can go to the next slide. This is something that we are preparing for next year. You've probably heard of a badging program, and we have used badging with our we've used badging with all of our teachers this last year as a way to get them involved in using our new learning management system, which is Canvas. And we have a lot of tools in there, but it's been focused on providing on-demand, personalized professional development or technology integration with our teachers. And it's been so popular that our teachers have decided they want to use that with their students. So for the next school year, teachers want to expand, and they've decided to use college and career readiness skills to award badges to their students once they've shown mastery. So there's a lot of benefits to this, is it empowers the students to become leaders in those particular areas of college and career readiness, and then they can share with other people, other students in their classroom, and it also individualizes it because they can go through the badging modules at their own pace, and everyone can get involved. It's not a one pace for everyone. So those are just some of the activities that we use to provide voice to the students. You can see in all of those activities, those are activities that the students are doing the work, the students are contributing, they're the ones that come up with their ideas within a specific framework, and they get to share their own learning versus the teachers sharing with the students. So the next slide there, and if, again, when you're linked to the slide deck, these are some resources that would go along with this, and again, that's pretty much what we're doing in the elementaries, and all of this is directly attributable to Andrea Meadows and the teachers in our 5th grade and all the elementary buildings. All right.
Okay, I think I'm up. Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you, Sean.
Okay, good. So hello, everyone. My name is Sean Churchill, and I am an instructional coach at Anderson High School. Prior to this, I was a tech integration specialist for 2 years, and I was also a high school Spanish teacher. I'm so happy to be here today. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we can use tech tools to effectively amplify student voice in the secondary classroom. So Mary, if you could go to slide 29, that would be great. So first off, I'm just going to talk a little bit about a couple of tech tools that I feel like really amplify student voice in the secondary classroom. And then lastly, I'm going to talk just a little bit about how you can use these tech tools with best instructional practice. So the first one that I want to talk about is Remind. And Remind is a tool that will work on iOS devices and also on Android devices, and also can work just on a regular computer as well. And so maybe some of you are familiar with this, and maybe some of you aren't, but Remind is a tech tool where students and teachers can communicate via text. And at first when I thought about this, I thought, why would I want to do that as a secondary teacher? It sounds like I'm making myself overly available, and I'm going to be up all night answering student texts. However, I watched a short video, and I included the video on the slide, and it's from the NACOL. And if you aren't familiar with that, it's the International Association for Online and K-12 Learning. And the video, just a brief synopsis about that, it just talks a little bit about how students communicate. And I think at first a lot of we might think that, oh, if I send an email to my students, they're going to answer it. And they probably aren't, because students are living on their cell phones. And instead of fighting that battle, why don't we just meet them where they are and stop fighting it? And I know sometimes we don't meet them in the classroom, but it's a great way to communicate with students. So I also read an article from the Pew Research Center, and it just talked a lot about how teens communicate. And 88% of teens, it says, communicate regularly on their cell phones with their friends. So why don't we do that as teachers? And this was actually, the study was from 2015, so the percentage is probably even higher now. So Remind is a great tool to do that. Remind helps teachers communicate with their students using text messaging without sharing phone numbers. So you're not giving your cell phone number out, but you're still using the text message on the phone to communicate with your students. It's great for reminding students of last-minute changes in course content, sending helpful reminders about upcoming projects and quizzes, helping students individually and giving them individual tutoring. And it's also great for parents and coaches. If we could go down to slide 30. So what I did is I just prepared some takeaways for you because we just don't have time for you to actually experiment with the tech tool. But if you decide to go down the Remind route, there's some takeaways on there for you. So the overview for teachers provides you with some ideas on how to use Remind. And the cool thing is students and parents can join Remind by texting the code 81010. And this is the same for everyone. So this would be the same for every single class, but the join code is specific. So the class code might be @Math101, and that's unique to each class. So if parents and students don't want to text, they can also receive communication through email. So that's an option too, because I know some parents also might not text. And parents and students can also download the Remind app from the App Store or Google Play Store, and some parents and students might prefer that, so they have their school messages all in one place, and they aren't getting intermingled with their personal ones, which I actually kind of preferred that when I used it as a classroom teacher. So what can you do with Remind? You can send announcements to the entire class, or you can do conversations just with one student or maybe a group of students. So the really cool thing is that you can choose one-way or two-way communication. So one of the teachers that I was working with exclusively last year was a high school English teacher, and when I showed her this, she just wanted to dip her toes in, and she didn't want to do the two-way communication first, so we just did one-way. And she loved it, and after setting some boundaries, which I would highly recommend because you don't want your students emailing you or texting you at midnight, then it just really worked well for that situation. So my sister is actually a family and consumer science teacher at Noblesville High School, and she has students in her classes that are doing internships at multiple daycares in Noblesville, and she uses Remind to let her students know of last-minute or urgent changes that she needs to communicate, and she also sends positive messages to brighten their day. It's a great way to build relationships with students, especially ones that you don't see on a regular basis, if that is your situation. I also have another math teacher that I work with, and she commonly sends attachments of the worksheet if they get lost to students. And Remind can directly connect to your Google Drive. So that's great as well if your school uses that tool, or also can connect to Google Classroom. So these are some of the really cool features, and I just like it because it's so versatile. So how could you use Remind if you were a teacher to really amplify student voice? I was under the top 10 ways to use Remind. I love the idea of using it for trivia or warm-up exercises. I actually did this with a teacher leader workshop, and I had all the teachers join my class using their smartphones, and then they answered some questions about themselves. And to kind of piggyback on what Dana was talking about, Remind would actually be a great tech tool to use for opening or closer in a high school classroom if you aren't in a one-to-one environment, but you still want to incorporate some technology. So on slide 31, I just wanted to give you a few more takeaways using Remind. And there's a how-to tutorial there, since we don't have time today to actually practice using it, that kind of walks you through how to use it if you want to do that. And I also shared a letter to send to parents, and one's in English and one's in Spanish. And I think this is really, really important to talk about. On July 10th in 2015, the Federal Communications Commission, they actually made a law. And with that law, it just requires teachers to practice a little bit more diligence. And so they ask you before using Remind to pass out these letters and actually collect them and keep record of who is actually using Remind and keep that in a safe place. But I would just make sure that you would do that before you actually start using Remind in your classroom, since that is a law that was passed in 2015. So ultimately, I think this is a great tech tool to connect with students and amplify student voice. Another tool that I want to talk a little bit about that we use commonly at Anderson High School, and right now I'm on slide 33, is Canvas discussions. And so this is our learning management system, and I realize that many schools have adopted Canvas in East Central Indiana, and I know some viewers may not have Canvas at their school or be familiar with it, But some of the teacher examples I'm going to show you could easily be replicated using a variety of text tools or other learning management systems. And I'm actually going to, if we have time, I'm going to show you another. I'm going to have you actually use one that kind of replicates the Canvas discussion in just a few minutes. So I really like using Canvas discussions to amplify student voice. It's very straightforward, and it gives every student a chance to respond. I know as a classroom teacher, I was always very guilty of calling on students that were always raising their hand. And before I had tech as a Spanish teacher, and now all students can respond, even if they're a little timid or they need time to think about a well-constructed response for those students that are very introverted. On the actual slide here, I have like a little tutorial on how you could use Canvas discussions. And I just wanted to talk a little bit just about a few examples of how middle school and high school teachers that I've worked with in the past have used Canvas discussions. One of them, one of the teachers was named Zach Davis, and he was a teacher, a sixth grade teacher that I worked with, and he used Canvas discussions. Students were able to, like, if they had a question about a particular, if they had a question after hours, they could ask him via Canvas discussions, or the cool thing was students were using the media recording tool and they were answering each other's questions, and the teacher was out of the equation, which I thought was brilliant. And then another teacher, an Algebra 1, her name was Shayna Bass, an Algebra 1 and Algebra 1 special education teacher. She used Canvas discussions to gather background knowledge for student vocabulary levels. So before she even started teaching, she would ask the students what other words they knew for, like, add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And then she compiled that list in a Google Doc. And then she knew what words to use, and while she was creating math problems, she used words that they knew. And that document wasn't static, but it also grew as their vocabulary their math vocab increased, and I absolutely loved that idea. So those were two math teachers that I worked with that used Canvas discussions in a really, really cool way to really amplify student voice. The last slide that I want to talk about, slide 34. I just wanted to talk a little bit about an activity that I worked with. I worked with an English teacher, and she used the Fishbowl Activity to really amplify student voice during this activity. And if you aren't familiar with the Fishbowl, all students, when you do the Fishbowl Activity in class, and you could do this with technology or without technology, but the technology just adds an extra layer. So all the students will be presented with a topic. And when you do the Fishbowl Activity, it's good if the topic is somewhat controversial and the students have an opinion about it. So the students are in two circles, and students in the inside of the circle are discussing text or the controversial issue. And the students on the outside are observing, listening, and posing questions while the discussion is going on. So the students are paired up, and one partner is in the inner circle, and then one partner is in the outer circle. And students are taking turns talking and exchanging rules. So in a fishbowl, students aren't genuinely listening to their peers and discuss. You want them to be genuinely listening. You don't want them to just be taking turns. So the short clip, like if you're like, I don't know what this looks like, I need an actual visual to help me see what the fishbowl looks like. I found a short clip from the teaching channel that really did a good job of depicting what the Fishbowl Activity would look like in an English 9 and 10 ELA classroom. And if you're really, really short on time, from like 7 minutes and 28 seconds to 10 minutes and 30 seconds is when this English teacher explains how to do the fishbowl. So I would highly encourage you to watch that. And if you don't know about the teaching channel, it's a great way to, if you're like really nervous about diving into a specific pedagogical practice, it's a great way to look at it before you actually do it. So I think that is a really, really good resource. So the way that you would use technology in this, if I were a teacher, is I found this, it's called an online discussion tab, and it was created by Alice Keeler, and she's a tech guru from Fresno, California. And what what I would do is I would have the students use that tool that are on the outer circle. And so the students that are on the outer circle, the ones that aren't talking, but they are just listening and observing, they would be writing questions in there for the students in the inner circle to answer, or they would also be sharing their knowledge with the students in the inner circle, and then they would take turns. So I thought that was just a great example of how you could use technology and a good best instructional practice together to really make students have a voice and then everybody to have a turn during a discussion where it was really, really controversial. So like I said in the teaching channel clip, the students are actually reading a piece of text by Martin Luther King titled Birmingham Jail. And so obviously, this, you know, if you aren't familiar with that, it was during the time, the Civil Rights Movement. And it's a very controversial piece where students would have strong feelings and opinions. So while the students were participating in the Fishbowl Activity, the whole idea is that we're going to discover the central idea and then do some argumentative writing afterward. So I just thought that was a really, really good example of how you could use both technology in the ELA classroom to kind of amplify student voice. So if we want to practice doing it, am I out of time, or do I need to, or do we have a few minutes to practice? I don't know, maybe we're out of time. If you want to, and you want to practice using this text tool, if
you can go ahead and practice, Sean.
Okay, great. So where it says let's practice using the discussion tab template, if you just want to practice using this text tool, it's made in Google Sheets and it was made by Alice Keeler, you can. So all you would do is you would just, on the left-hand side where it says discussion tab template, if you click right there, you can enter in a response. So my question was, what are your spring break plans? And I wrote in one of the cells, so if you just wanted to write your name, and then you could write what your spring break plans are if you want to, you can, or you can just use it as a later reference. That is awesome. And that is all I have. So I will turn it over to Mary or Jordan.
All right. Thank you, Sean, very much. That was great information. So it doesn't look like we had any questions. I'll let Jordan chime in if she saw any, but I did not see any questions that didn't get answered through the presentation. I saw some great ideas shared. Thank you guys for discussing in the background and sharing some things that you all are doing. Let me look through really quick.
I am throwing the link to the presentation in one more time, just in case anyone missed it, so that you can access these Google Slides and retrieve all of this information when you want to use it.
Thank you, Jordan. Did you see any questions that weren't answered?
I did not, no.
I didn't either. So with that, I think we'll be done a few minutes early. I want to thank Dana and John and Sean for being in on the presentation today. Andrea also was a contributor to this, but it was a really awesome hour of learning. And again, I'm thankful for all of you for the small group that we had. Y'all were small but mighty. It was a good conversation, and like I said, I've been recording this webinar, and I hope to have it shared on our YouTube channel by early next week, and I will send out PGP certificates in the next day or two to all of you who were in the live webinar today. So again, thank you to our presenters, Dana, John, Sean, and Andrea. Thank you, Jordan, for putting this together. It was a great working relationship here that I had with our literacy specialist. That was an awesome idea. I loved this topic that we shared today. So thank you all again, and have a wonderful evening.